Why quiet confidence scares people. The moment you stop trying to impress people, something strange happens. The people who ignored you begin watching you. The people who controlled you begin questioning you. And the people who once felt comfortable around you suddenly become uncomfortable. You didn't get louder. You didn't change your appearance or your achievements or your status. You simply stopped asking for permission to exist as you are. And that single shift rearranges every relationship around you, whether anyone admits it out loud or not. Because quiet confidence doesn't just change you, it changes how everyone sees you. Most people assume confidence is loud. They picture the person who dominates the conversation, who fills every silence, who makes sure everyone in the room knows exactly how impressive they are. But that kind of confidence is easy to read, and anything easy to read is easy to manage. The version of confidence that actually unsettles people is almost invisible. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't perform. It simply stops needing anything from you, and that absence of need is what people can't quite explain and can't quite ignore. You've probably noticed this without having language for it. A coworker who stopped chasing praise and suddenly seemed harder to overlook. A friend who stopped over-explaining themselves and suddenly seemed harder to argue with. Someone you dated who stopped seeking your reassurance and suddenly seemed harder to stop thinking about. At first, you thought they simply changed, but what actually changed was the amount of leverage you had over them. And once that leverage disappeared, so did your certainty about how to treat them. Here's the uncomfortable truth beneath all of this. Most social power isn't built on charisma. It's built on predictability. People feel safe around you when they can accurately guess how you'll react, when your approval can be won with the right compliment, when your mood can be managed with the right apology, when your behavior can be shaped by the promise of being liked. Quiet confidence breaks that predictability completely. Machiavelli understood that perception often influences people more than explanation, and a person who no longer explains themselves becomes a person whose perception can no longer be shaped by anyone but themselves. This is why silence feels so unsettling to people who are used to reading you. When you stop over-explaining, stop justifying, stop filling every gap with reassurance, you're not being cold. You're simply refusing to hand over the information people use to manage you. And silence, in the absence of information, forces the other person to fill in the blanks themselves, usually with their own fears, their own insecurities, their own private questions about where they stand with you. This is why calm people often seem to control conversations without saying the most. They're not dominating the room. They're simply not offering themselves up to be interpreted, which forces everyone else to do the interpreting. Here's what almost nobody notices. The loudest person in most rooms is often the most insecure one. Volume is frequently a request for reassurance disguised as confidence. A constant, exhausting effort to be seen, agreed with, validated, admired. Quiet confidence has no such requirement. It doesn't need the room's agreement to feel real. And that's precisely what makes people who thrive on being needed so uneasy around it. Because you can't offer validation to someone who was never asking for it in the first place. Think about the people in your life who have made you feel small with nothing more than a raised eyebrow, a slow response, an unreadable pause. That wasn't manipulation through aggression. It was often simple emotional detachment. And detachment, strange as it sounds, tends to increase perceived value rather than diminish it. The less available someone's emotions are for you to influence, the more your mind assumes there must be a reason. People rarely question the value of someone who's constantly chasing them. They almost always question the value of someone who isn't. But the strangest part comes next. Emotional self-control is often mistaken for hidden power, even when the person exercising it isn't trying to seem powerful at all. When you stop reacting instantly to criticism, to provocation, to someone's attempt to unsettle you, people around you start assuming you know something they don't. In reality, you've often just stopped needing the interaction to go a certain way. But to an insecure observer, calm in the face of provocation looks like strategy, even when it's simply peace. Machiavelli recognized that emotional discipline quietly strengthens authority, not because it intimidates people directly, but because it denies them the one thing they were hoping to extract from you, a reaction they could use. This is where it gets even more unsettling. People become deeply uncomfortable around someone they cannot emotionally influence, because so much of how humans navigate relationships depends on being able to shift another person's mood, guilt them into compliance, flatter them into agreement, provoke them into defense. These are the invisible levers most people pull constantly, often without realizing it, and quiet confidence quietly removes every single one of those levers from reach. When someone can no longer make you feel guilty, flattered, or defensive on command, they don't just lose influence over you. They lose the illusion that they ever understood you, and very few things are more disorienting than realizing someone you thought you had figured out was never fully within your reach. Here's a hidden social truth most people never articulate. Secure people don't compete for attention, because attention was never the thing they were after. They're not trying to win the room, outshine the conversation, or prove they belong somewhere. And in social environments built almost entirely around subtle competition, for relevance, for approval, for status, someone who simply refuses to play becomes disorienting to be around. You can't outcompete someone who isn't competing. You can only stand there, mid-performance, suddenly aware of how much effort you're spending on a game the other person quietly walked away from. It gets even more unsettling once you notice how often people test quiet confidence without realizing that's what they're doing. A subtle jab dressed as a joke, a question designed to provoke defensiveness, a pause left open just long enough to see if you'll rush to fill it with justification. These aren't always conscious manipulations. Often they're just old habits, developed from years of successfully reading and steering other people's reactions. When the habit doesn't work, when the jab lands and nothing shifts in your face, when the pause stays comfortably empty, something in the other person recalibrates. They begin, often without naming it, treating you differently, more carefully, sometimes with more distance, occasionally, unexpectedly, with more respect than they ever offered before. Maybe you've experienced this in reverse, chasing someone's approval for years, only to notice that the moment you stopped needing it, their behavior toward you started to change. This is one of the more unsettling truths about human nature. Approval loses its power the instant you stop chasing it. Not because the other person suddenly respects you more out of principle, but because your need was the very thing giving their opinion weight in the first place. Remove the need, and their opinion becomes just that, an opinion, not a verdict. This next shift changes every relationship it touches. Respect tends to follow emotional independence far more reliably than it follows charisma. Charisma can win a room for an evening. Emotional independence changes how people treat you permanently, because it signals that your sense of worth isn't something they hold power over. People may enjoy the company of someone charming, but they respect, almost involuntarily, someone whose peace they cannot touch. Most people misunderstand this completely. They assume confident people are simply less afraid. In reality, quiet confidence usually isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to stop letting other people's opinions dictate your next move, fear included. You can feel uncertain and still refuse to perform certainty for an audience. You can feel hurt and still decline to prove it to the person who hurt you. This is the part almost no one tells you. Quiet confidence is not a feeling. It's a boundary around how much control you allow your emotions to hand over to other people. Here's why this specifically threatens insecure people, without making them villains for it. Insecurity survives on comparison, reassurance, and control. It needs external validation the way a fire needs oxygen. So when someone nearby stops offering comparison points, stops needing reassurance, and cannot be emotionally controlled, that fire has less to feed on. It's not that they consciously decide to resent you. It's that your calm becomes an unconscious mirror, quietly reflecting back everything they haven't resolved within themselves. People rarely enjoy standing next to a mirror they didn't ask for. The real reason is much deeper than social awkwardness. Human beings are wired to read each other constantly, for threat, for opportunity, for hierarchy, for belonging. Someone who can be read easily fits neatly into that system. Someone who can't creates a small, persistent itch of uncertainty. Are they judging me? Do they like me? What are they really thinking? Quiet confidence doesn't answer those questions, and the refusal to answer is precisely what keeps people quietly, involuntarily fixated on you. Machiavelli observed that people rarely know how to respond to someone who cannot be easily influenced. And that discomfort, more often than hostility, is what most people are actually feeling when they call someone intimidating, without being able to say why. Family dynamics reveal this pattern in a quieter, more painful way. In many families, one person is unconsciously assigned the role of needing the least, the one who apologizes first, who keeps the peace, who explains themselves so the group never has to sit with discomfort. When that person finally stops performing that role, stops over-explaining their choices, stops seeking approval for decisions that were always theirs to make, the reaction is rarely gratitude. It's often quiet, confused resistance. Not because the family wishes them harm, but because the entire system had quietly depended on that person's need for approval to keep functioning smoothly. Remove the need, and the whole structure has to find a new shape. The same thing plays out, almost identically, in the smaller theater of social media. Notice how unsettling it can be to encounter someone who posts without seeking validation. No caption engineered for reassurance. No visible hunger for the numbers underneath. In a space built almost entirely around visible approval, someone who appears indifferent to it becomes strangely magnetic. Not because indifference is inherently attractive, but because it's rare enough to seem like a secret. People assume someone who doesn't need the applause must already have something the rest of the room is still chasing. Here's what almost nobody notices about workplace politics specifically. Praise in most professional environments functions as a quiet leash. The employee who visibly needs recognition can be managed with recognition. A compliment here, a title there, just enough acknowledgement to keep them compliant and hungry for more. But an employee who does excellent work and doesn't seem to need it noticed becomes far harder to manage through the usual channels, because the usual channels were never actually currency to them. This is often mistaken for arrogance. It's rarely that. It's simply someone whose sense of competence isn't waiting on anyone else's sign-off. The manager who reacts to every piece of criticism, who needs the team's constant approval, who visibly craves being liked, that person is easy to manage from below, even while holding the title of authority. But the leader who listens calmly, responds without urgency, and doesn't need the room's agreement to make a decision becomes someone people instinctively defer to, often without being able to explain why. Authority, in practice, often has less to do with position and far more to do with how little of your composure other people are able to shake. The same pattern plays out in dating, though it's rarely named directly. The partner who is constantly seeking reassurance becomes, over time, easier to underestimate, not because their feelings are less real, but because their need is visible, and visible need is something people learn they can manage or ignore. The partner who is emotionally whole with or without the relationship becomes someone the other person has to actually show up for, because there's no guaranteed audience waiting on standby. Desire, strangely, often follows the same law as respect. It grows where it isn't required to stay. You may be realizing, somewhere in the middle of all this, that some of your own past relationships shifted the moment you stopped explaining, stopped chasing, stopped needing to be understood immediately. Maybe you assumed you'd lose people by pulling back your need for their approval. And maybe instead, something quieter and more permanent grew in its place, not because you tried harder to keep them, but because you stopped performing for them entirely. This is the part that reframes everything. Quiet confidence was never about being unaffected by people. It was never about coldness or superiority or emotional distance for its own sake. It's about becoming secure enough internally that other people's opinions stop functioning as instructions for how you should feel about yourself. You can still care. You can still love people deeply, work hard for things that matter, want to be understood by the people closest to you. What changes is that none of it depends on being granted permission first. And this is perhaps the part that matters most. None of this requires becoming a different person. You don't need to withhold warmth to be secure or manufacture distance to seem powerful. The performance of detachment is just another performance, and performances still depend on an audience's reaction to feel complete. Real quiet confidence doesn't perform anything for anyone ever. It simply stops asking the room for a verdict before deciding how to feel about itself. That's the entire shift, invisible to describe, unmistakable to witness. The people who fear your quiet confidence aren't reacting to your silence. They're reacting to the fact that your peace can no longer be controlled, not by their approval, not by their disapproval, not by anything they say or withhold. And once someone realizes they can no longer shape how you feel about yourself, they're left facing something far more uncomfortable than your silence. Their own reflection, standing in a room they no longer know how to control. The strongest presence in any room is rarely the loudest voice. It's the person who no longer needs the room to prove their worth.